Good morning, everyone. It's great to see so many people this early in the morning. I'm Elliot Gerson of the Aspen Institute. I see many people whom I've seen at earlier Ideas Festivals. It was my privilege to be part of the team who brought the very first one together, and it is now my privilege to have a conversation with four of the leaders of the Aspen Institute globally and good friends. And my hope is that we'll have a conversation that all of you can engage in, just as I'm sure my colleagues here will engage with each other. Before I do that, I do want to say a couple of things. One, this is the first time ever that we've had all representatives of all of the other Aspen Institutes. There are 13 others around the world, and there's and actually an initiative as well in Kenya. So we now have Aspen Institute flags in every continent. And we have brought everyone today, this week together, because of generous contributions to the Institute, particularly generous contribution from the trustee who chairs this committee, Claire Munyana, who's here, and I want to thank her in particular for her generosity. But very, very importantly, in a sense, we're dedicating this entire week to the memory of Leonard Lauder, who passed away just last week. And as I said in some comments I made last week, in the pantheon of the Aspen Institute, certainly Walter Pepko as our founder would be at the top, but I don't know that there's anyone else at that level than Leonard Lauder. And a particular love of his and dedication of his was the international network of Aspens. And they are thriving largely because of his inspiration and support and his belief that the Aspen idea needs to exist globally. And the conversation we're going to have today, I think, is illustrative of why Leonard saw such importance in the idea of Aspen and its global significance. I think we all recognize, wherever we're from, in whatever context, that we are suffering a crisis of loss of trust. And we can see that in the United States. We see it virtually everywhere in the world. And there are some things that are specific to particular countries. And I think as our conversation, I hope will go, we'll also look at some things that may be common about why we have this problem, why it's so acute, why it's so troubling. And the other thing I need to mention at the outset is that, not coincidentally, in the strategic plan of the Aspen Institute, this element of social trust and its decline, and particularly, of course, what we can do about it, is an essential element of the strategic plan of the Aspen Institute going forward, at the Aspen Institute in the United States. So we are trying to develop methods to do things about this, which is so damaging to the social fabric, political fabric, cultural fabric in all of our countries. So with me to discuss this today, we have, we could have just picked straws out of the remarkable group of colleagues we have from around the world, and the unlucky straws that were drawn. Mircea Joana has most recently been the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, and went back to Romania, and went back to his first love is his wife, who was here, but his love and the Aspen Institute. He was the founder of the Aspen Institute, which began just around the time I joined the Aspen Institute, and it's become an extraordinary institution in Romania. In addition to that, he's been a presidential candidate in his country. He was president of the Senate in Romania, and I could go on and on, president of his party, but the Aspen Institute has been a central element. He has been involved with the Institute longer than anyone on the stage, but a special welcome to our newest member of the family. Anne-Gabrielle Heilbronner is the president that board chair, essentially, of Aspen France. She has just been appointed to that position relatively recently. This is her first visit to Aspen and first time at an Aspen Ideas Festival. She is the corporate secretary of the Publicis Group, a global company in Paris. Before that, she's had a very distinguished career, including stints in government ministries and finance, economics, foreign policy, but also chairing the Women's Forum on Society and Economy in France. And we are delighted to have her as part of the family. Pablo Garcia Berdoy, a dear old friend, also has a long connection with the Institute, and actually Mircea is involved in that in the sense that in one of his many very significant posts, diplomatic posts for the Spanish government, he was the ambassador to Romania. And he saw the remarkable things going on under Mircea's leadership and said, well, why don't we have an Aspen Institute in Spain? So he actually created an Aspen Institute in Spain with many others. And then he was drawn back into diplomatic service, and he'd had an earlier career in the foreign ministry. And he became the permanent representative ambassador of Spain to the European Union. And he was also, another connection with Aspen, he was ambassador of Spain to Germany, where he was able to be very involved with our first overseas Aspen there. And then our youngest Aspen, other than our soon-to-be Aspen, we hope, in Kenya, is in Colombia. And Pablo Navas is the executive director of that wonderful new institute, which in just 3 years has become an enormously significant feature of Colombian society. So we have a great cross-section of Aspen, but I think very different countries, very different contexts to talk about this common problem that we have. So what I'm going to do is start with each person asking a little bit about an element specific to their country, and then we're going to get into a conversation, involve all of you, in terms of what we see as the global contributors to this terrible problem, and specifically what Aspen can do about it. But Mircea, tell us a little bit about the Romanian context, and of course, the Romanian election annulment earlier this year, which must have been yet another assault on the challenges of trust. And what does it mean in your country for civic confidence and restoring it?
So good to be back in Aspen. The Aspen family is growing, and I want to thank Elliot and Claire and Jonathan, and of course Leonard. He has been our guide and our mentor, and we'll always miss him. Listen, Romanian elections were pretty unusual, even by Romanian standards. So if I want to put in front of you a sort of a visual metaphor why things went that way, and the roller coaster of our annulled elections, Vice President J.D. Vance mentioning Romanian election 3 times in Munich at the security conference, I was in the room. I would put in front of you the image of a Molotov cocktail of frustrations with multiple ingredients and a fuse. The first ingredient, which is, I think, not only Romanian, it's American, it's Colombian, it's Spanish, it's French, and my friends and colleagues will delve into that, is a deep desire of our public opinions, of our people, for radical change, for real change, for substantial change, and not just incremental, step-by-step kind of change. And this desire was, in the case of Romania, fueled by a huge dissatisfaction against the political establishment of the country. Grand coalition, the big 2 parties in the same coalition for years, a sense of incompetence at the top, a sense of corruption, a sense of aloofness, and a distance from the concerns of the daily people. There's also a socio-economic component in all the situations. In Romania, it's a particular case in point. Since we joined NATO and the EU some 20 years back, Romania has probably had one of the most spectacular advances in economic growth. We quadrupled our GDP. At the purchasing parity power, Romania is ahead of Poland ahead of Hungary, ahead of Greece, ahead of Portugal. And Bucharest, which is the big capital city of this country, of our country, is again adjusted to purchasing parity power at the level of Vienna or Berlin. At the same time, the distribution of this new wealth was exceptionally uneven. 8 big cities in my country, 8 big cities, are contributing to 80% of our GDP, and the rest of the country, a sizable country, is basically left almost with nothing. That's why we had 5 million of young Romanians leaving the country to find a better life. In Europe mainly, but also around the world. You find Romanians everywhere. So that's the paradox of economic growth. So that's a socio-economic component. Then I will add another component which I believe is the recirculation of older ideas in new formats, in new contexts. In America, to give you an example, and I love America, I love this country. I was ambassador very young of my country to Washington when my wife and our very young kids and our son-in-law who's here now. So basically what really happened in Romania is in a way the recirculation of McCarthyism ideas, or you see the primaries in New York City, close to socialist ideas. In the Romanian case, in our elections, there was a recirculation of fascist ideas between the 2 world wars that were quite powerful in my country, inspired by Italy and by Nazi Germany. Then national communists during the communist years, because we invented in Romania, sometimes we don't invent the best things, sometimes we do, a special national brand of national communism, so very nationalistic, still communist. And now in our elections, we have seen the recirculation of the old ideas in a new format. This is quite interesting, is another ingredient of the cocktail, the Molotov cocktail I'm putting visually in front of you. And then, of course, there was, like always, in my country, in other countries probably, influence of ideas coming from the outside. We've always been influenced by our homegrown thinking and culture and realities and history and mythology. But we also influenced, and of course the outcome is particular. And I think in Romania it was a huge competition, ideologically speaking, between the Romanian version of the MAGA movement. And we've seen that in many other countries. In Poland, there was the case in many other elections. In Canada, in Australia, Romania was not an exception. And what I would call a progressive / close to President Macron in France, and Anne Gabriel will say, where we had basically an ideological fight. So the political center was basically annihilated. For the first time in 35 years of democracy after communism, the big parties, the 2 big parties, didn't make a candidate to the runoff. And let's say, the MAGA-style candidates made it to the final, and then in the repetition of elections, the progressive side. And the president of Romania, the new one, Nicu Șordan, is representing the progressive movement. And the last point about the fuse. Oh, again, it was a lot of Russian meddling with our elections. That's the fuse, the match, if you want, that is putting this very inflammable cocktail. It's homegrown. It's homegrown. It has a lot of external influence, but there was also a very savvy, sophisticated, perfidious, if you want, implication by the Russians, by just exploiting and amplifying our own discontent. And then boom. And we had to push the nuclear button of democracy, annulling elections by the Constitutional Court in Romania, which is totally unprecedented I think, in the history of democracies all over the world. So Romania is a beautiful country, growing nicely. Yeah, we are.
Well,
we'll move forward.
And I can just see, looking at the faces in the room, the fascination with what you're describing in Romania, and at the same time, many people saying, oh my, very parallel to what we see perhaps here and in many other places. And Gabrielle, so let's talk about France and the rising support for the national rally, tensions ahead of 2027. How is all of that shaping trust in French institutions, and how is that going to affect, in your opinion, French democracy?
Thank you for the question, Elliot, and my big thank you for you and Claire, and of course Mr. Lauder for being here today. What we have in France is some kind of a tale of the two cities. You see, on the one hand, we have a profound crisis of trust towards, political leaders and political parties, and we know that because we have a yearly barometer. So we are assessing each year the level of trust, and believe me, it's at the lowest level ever, and even lower than in tons of other European countries. But at the same time, if you ask people what is the best regime, 83% would say democracy, without a doubt. So I think this is exactly the situation we're in, plus a very low morale. When you see French people as, super confident and arrogant, and that's not the reality, there is a high level of depression and anxiety in the country. This being said, when we focus on the National Rally and what's going to happen, you should know that this is a far-right party that was created in 1972 and was very smartly renamed and rebranded year after year so that it now has some kind of a respectability and a nice mainstream polished image. I would put this into what we call the Thai strategy. The Thai strategy is actually what was said to the National Rally members of parliament after they were elected. They were asked to dress in a very formal attire so that, they would project an image of seriousness and rigor and respectability. They reached 33% of voters in 2024, 10 million people. So here in the US, 10 million is not that huge, but in France, believe me, it's significant, especially when you think that 2 years before they were at 4 million. So that's where they are. Now, their leader, Marine Le Pen, was sentenced to ineligibility, so we really do not know how they are going to approach the presidential election in 2027. It's a big, big question mark. What we should know also is that behind the scene, you have people like Vincent Bolloré using the media ownership to influence public opinion. You have a conservative billionaire, Pierre-Edouard Stérin, investing hundreds of millions in the Pericles project to try and put in place a message with nationalist, Eurosceptic, xenophobic ideas, and investing in education and media. So that's, what's happening behind the scene, and it could be very dangerous. But again, our institutions are solid. They are, for the moment, well in place and resisting. And the reason why we have only 120 members of parliament from the far right is because there was this kind of Republican front that was created, some kind of a tactical alliance between the rest of the parties to, put an end to the growth of the National Rally. But the threat now is that we are blocked. We have three strong political forces in France: the centrists, the extreme left, and the National Rally. And the risk for us is that there is no majority, and the government cannot act, and that we have a government that is in place and whose objective is just to remain in place and to hold on to power without doing the work they were elected to do. So from where I stand, this is the biggest threat, actually, because it will impact even more the lack of trust that we see today. And I think that if we want to react to this and to win, then we have to put in place a powerful, positive story. Where the populists are good is on storytelling, and they play on emotions. So if in front of the National Rally, you come with facts and figures and regulation and reasonable stuff, you will not win. So that's what I think we should do. Put in place a compelling, positive story for democracy and human rights.
Thank you, Anne-Gabrielle. Pablo, the first of two Pablos. The global spread of populism that we've been talking about here seems to have a slightly different tone in Spain, maybe less ideologically based and more about just almost the fundamental deconstruction of the institutions that brought Spain into democracy 50 years ago. So I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about how you see these things we've been talking about in Spain. And then we're going to talk in the little time we have about things across all of our countries.
Thank you very much, Eliot, and lovely to be here. I set up this Aspen Institute with the help of friends, mainly Eliot, 50 years ago. We have this wonderful task of trying to help the social and political dialogue in Spain. And frankly speaking, I didn't think at that time that we were going to see ourselves in this situation 50 years ago. Eliot pointed out something that's very important. The question in Spain is not about extreme right or extreme left. It's not so serious in that respect. The two main political parties are occupying a good space of the political forces in general. We have tensions, regional tensions that you are very well aware that have been very risky at a given time, but I think we have been able to manage this. But the core issue is, as Eliot was saying, the lack of faith in the institutions. And this is a common issue. So I'm not going to get into many details because you are going to be, by this time, completely lost with all these names that have been popping up with my predecessors. I think the main thing we have in common is how we protect and enforce the institutions that we have that are the key pillars of democracy in our countries. And this is a task for us in Spain, as it is a task for you in the US, as it in Romania, France, and Colombia. So what do we do about it? Do we consider that this is a side effect, or do we consider that this is the core element of what is going on? I have the tendency to believe that once we don't respect institutions, things go down. And we maybe not perceive that we are on a daily life not respecting institutions as we thought we are. So when we allow people to say things which are not true on public media and we don't contradict them, when we allow people who are in responsibility to get away with lies, and when we allow that the social dimension of our public debates doesn't take into account that we have processes that have to be respected, laws that have to be implemented and approved by parliaments, by governments proposing, etc., etc. I belong to those who are dealing with European Union issues for quite a long time. And one of the key advantages that we have, the three of us, is that we also have another framework that protects our institutions at the European level. So Brussels is also helping us to help our institutions to function properly. So my take is that the new generation has a bit forgotten where we came from, like 50 years ago when we had a dictatorship, when the institutions were not respecting the rules completely. And where are we leading if we go on like this, not respecting institutions and procedures? This is my main take in Spain.
So Pablo Navas, and I'd also like to make another acknowledgement in that really the founding spirit for Aspen Colombia is our trustee Ann McNulty, who we have standing room only and sitting room only, so she's raising her hand, but she really has been the inspiration for this newest Aspen that is thriving under the leadership of Pablo, who has been one of the most distinguished leaders in the educational sector in Colombia, led the University of the Andes in Bogota, led many other educational organizations in the country, and now just in 3 years has done remarkable things in that country. And of course, compared to what we've just talked about, Colombia, I mean, wasn't for 50 years. There's been violence and virtual civil war of a kind almost unique in the Western Hemisphere. And I wonder if you could just maybe talk about, in the decades since the peace agreement in Colombia, what is the state of social trust in your country, and what is still tearing it apart, and what is holding it together?
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you, Claire and Jonathan, and of course Anne, for everything that you've done for Aspen Colombia. I have to say I'm very honored to be with these very generous and prestigious colleagues here in this podium. Well, you probably don't know much about Colombia or Latin America, and that's very understandable. Gabriel Garcia Marquez wrote, when he received the Nobel Prize, a beautiful essay which was called La Soledad de América Latina, Latin American Solitude, and we're still very alone. After 50 years of guerrilla fighting, of civil war, I would say, in 2016, President Santos signed a peace agreement, which in a way, for many of us, looked like a rebuilding of societal trust, or a possibility of rebuilding a societal trust. But I have to say, I don't think it has worked that way. I was very worried to be negative in this session, but after hearing the Molotov cocktail, I'm going to sound as positive
learning from the best.
Anyone. Okay, FARC left the arms. They became a political party. There were some new institutions like the HEP, which is a special jurisdiction for transitional justice, the Commission of Truth. So in many ways, it worked well. But on the other hand, it polarized the country of those that wanted the peace agreement and those that opposed. The next government, 2 years afterwards, in 2018, was President Duque, who was of the party that opposed the peace agreement. So that didn't help. And the actual president is President Petro, who is the first socialist president in Colombia, which has had two things that you've mentioned, which I think are very much against societal trust. First, he's a populist. And populists, regardless if they're from the right or the left, promise things that never happen. And that creates frustration and loses society trust, you know? And that's what is happening now. And the other thing is that the language he uses. Maybe that sounds familiar here too. You know, he refers anyone that is against what he says, it's a criminal, it's an assassin. He calls former president assassins. Institutions, you know, whenever the Congress is against him, he just goes against them with an amazing, terrifying verbal violence. And that, I think, has not helped at all in building societal trust. So you have populism, where ideology is certainly ahead or more important than results, right? Evidence, forget about evidence. Everything is being decided upon ideology. So that creates a lot of frustration because there are very few results. And that has led to growing violence, especially in some areas in Colombia. And certainly, and we're going to talk about it, the youth, they don't find jobs. They find that promises are not being fulfilled. So I think I am a bit negative about societal trust in Colombia.
Well, let's transition, and I'm going to start with you, Pablo, about, you know, from this negativism and this description and diagnosis of the problem, about what we can do about it, and maybe specifically what the Aspen Institute or institutes can do about it. And I want to start by commending Pablo for some of the things that he's already done in these last 3 years in that country to try to restore trust and just get people to talk to each other who haven't before. And then I will go through each of you, and then I promise, like everything at Aspen, I'm going to then, even though I could spend all day, allow you all to ask a question as long as we have time. But he, for example, has created seminars like Aspen does in many other cases. And he got permission for even the ones we export to do them in Spanish in his country, because he made the point to me, he said, you know, only about 8% of Colombians or whatever it is speak English. If we do our seminars in English, it's just going to be the elite talking to the elite. What are we going to accomplish? So not only is he doing things in Spanish, but he is doing things in parts of Colombia. I've mentioned to Colombians, for example, that you've been doing things in Chocó. And they looked at me and said, oh my God, you do things in Chocó? How can you do that? So just tell us what you and the Aspen Institute are trying to do and already accomplishing to start bringing especially young people who otherwise wouldn't be talking to each other together.
Thank you, Elliot, and thanks, Anne April, because without your support, we wouldn't have been able to do that. One of the things that we found, we started out of, I would say, out of ignorance, but we created our own program based on Aspen Global Leadership Network program, which is a very structured program. But we did it in Spanish, and it was a leadership, or it is called a leadership program. It's called Liderando a Colombia. But very soon we found that it was more than leadership. We were offering the possibility of building trust, because we were sitting people on the table that would have never sat with each other. We were breaking the bubbles that exist in Colombia, more so than certainly here in the States. And you find people that find the others opposites, maybe not enemies, but certainly people that would have never sat with them. And the Aspen magic, it's unbelievable. Usually our trainers tell us, trust the process. And to see those people just relate as human beings, forgetting about where they're coming from, it's magic. And the results have been unbelievable. Unfortunately, we are doing only 3 cohorts a year, and it's 24 persons per cohort. So at times we wonder how much we're going to influence what's going on in the country. But certainly it's been very successful thanks to what Aspen has created for the last 75 years.
So just quickly, if you could all jump in, and then I do want to go to the audience. I mean, you're getting more involved again with Spain. What are your thoughts, Pablo?
Well, this is a key. Let me tell a very short anecdote. The first time I met Leonard Loader, I said to him, Leonard, Aspen is not really global because it doesn't speak Spanish. So he was quite understandable, and he supported me immensely. Now, what we have is different kinds of programs that I would like to underline one in particular, and this is the 12th edition, so 12 years doing the same thing, which is putting together young politicians, the youngest of all political parties. And we put them together during the year. We do this program, and they intervene in leadership programs, in different programs that we have as a group, young leaders intervening as a group, politicians from all the political parties. And this has created a bridge. I'm not going to mention names because some of them are now prime ministers and foreign ministers and things like that, but I'm telling you, this is working because we have been able to maintain the relationship between the political parties at a kind of a long-term level, which is absolutely essential if, and I go back to the beginning, we want to preserve the institutions. And this is our key issue in Spain.
Gabriel, do you have any thoughts? You've been in the job for a month. I'm sure you have.
Well, actually, we are quite a small Aspen, even if we are great and prestigious and whatever. We also want to be realistic on what we can achieve. So for the moment, what we've done is we've opened a bit more what we were doing to the youth, especially students. We've organized partnerships with universities. We are also operating a young leader program, and this young leaders program is very inclusive. We see people from various backgrounds and origins, and we are creating an alumni community so that we can regroup them across generation more often. So that's what we've done. And believe me or not, but when I took the chairmanship role at Aspen, people in the room were not at all looking like you guys, but a bit more like looking like this panel without me. So we created Women of Aspen, so that we have women now joining us, so that's great. And we've also created, that's very different, but it can be powerful because of, you know, the globalization that is still in place today. We've created a group of ambassadors, not ambassadors like people who are asking to promote what we are doing. No, no, not this kind. The kind of this gentleman, so people involved in diplomacy, representing their countries, and we are regrouping them regularly to share on various topics. So that's what we are doing short term. Now, we are working on a more ambitious action to onboard more people, have a broader and greater impact with partnerships with NGOs and maybe programs similar to what is being done in Colombia, which I think is a great inspiration for all of us. But I would add just one thing. I truly believe, because I'm super young at Aspen, I've also discovered that a number of our core values are absolutely critical if we want to have an impact on what's happening today. First, when we talk about trust, it all start with ourselves, you know, whether we trust oneself. And I think that putting the human being at the center is absolutely critical. And that's also what we need to do. And dialogue, of course, be able to talk to people who think differently. You do not have a lot of places where this is still possible. Aspen is one of those. And finally, hope. You know, at Aspen, we still believe we can have a positive impact and create a greater future. And again, not every institution are in that mindset. Sorry to be long, but
no, it's great.
Important to share.
And Mircea, briefly, so we can turn it to the audience.
We'll be turning 20 years since we started Aspen in Romania. We are very proud to have done. And I think in a way we are a precursor of many of the new Aspens because we did well. What we do, and I think it's working, not only to get out of our bubble, we are in the bubble. And if you don't engage in conversations that are respectful and equal footing, and you listen to the others, because sometimes we are preaching to the choir, and also we believe we have the universal truth just because we are more educated or more fortunate, or we have just a big position in our societies. So that's why in Aspen we've been doing leadership programs on a huge scale for a relatively medium-sized country like Romania. We have trained young people from 39 different nations. Even Iranian opposition came to our programs. We have an office in Moldova, in Chisinau. We opened an office in Brussels. So we believe that bringing people from different walks of lives, not only social strata, but also from walks of life. That's why we embrace the concept of being transversal in what we do. So every policy program on technology, on energy, on healthcare, wonderful health ideas, by the way, exceptionally interesting, on governance, has a leadership program dedicated to that. And then we bring together people that speak about technology and regulators, and then people that speak about telemedicine and e-learning. So I think what we've done well, and I think we should be doing even better in the years to come, is to really, be inclusive, be diverse, and be transversal in what we do. So I think that the brand of Aspen Romania in Romania and in Europe, I hope also around the world is growing, and together with Vlad, our executive director, and my team, we are very proud to what we have accomplished. And And we're not stopping there. We'll be opening offices in many other places, and we hope this is not a surprise to our American colleagues, even here. We have to start fundraising aggressively all over the place.
Well, I wish we had all day with these
Elliot,
people. I wanna,
maybe just one
Yep.
thing I would add is because we're an international network, I think this is also something super important, and I'm happy to say that Mircea joined my board of Aspen France, and that's, I think, something we can continue to do together.
So we have time for perhaps a question or two. Yes, gentlemen here. If we could wait for the microphone because this is all being recorded. Thank you.
Good morning. So we heard a lot about countries where obviously trust is in decline, unfortunately. So small query, where is it not in decline?
Well, it's in decline, but not everywhere. And if I refer to the yearly barometer I was mentioning a bit earlier, for example, if you take the local politicians, you know, the mayors, for example, they benefit from a high level of trust. Also some institutions like schools, hospitals, and, believe it or not, the army and the police. So, you know.
Anybody have a suggestion for
In
where?
Romania, there is trust in NATO, 73%, EU, 60-something%, the church and the military, and then the abyss.
Well, I would add up that also the military, the healthcare system, the police, the head of state in Spain is also very respected. So we have a king, as you know, and those are the institutions that, when you have all these, questionnaires that they ask, are on the top of the trust in my country.
In the case of Colombia, Congress has gone up. It was so low that it was hard to go lower. But it has gone up.
And something that is positive also in France is small and medium-sized companies. They benefit from a very high level of trust, which is different from very big multinational global companies. But small, medium-sized company, people love them and trust them.
Okay, back here.
So one of the biggest things that, especially in America, is the news media, which you didn't really mention, is all the alternate sources, especially young people, social media, where they think it's legitimate sources of news and lack of respect for political establishment. What is the Aspen Institute doing with news media in order to engage more of them, to be more respectful of not only the political process, but their own countries?
Actually, Mircea mentioned the press a little bit, but and then why don't you go ahead and I'll say a little bit about the Institute generally.
I mentioned the cocktail. Also in terms of information war, it was an information warfare during election campaigns everywhere, but also in my country. So it was a very unprecedented stealth campaign of a candidate that really showed up from nowhere. Nobody saw the big train
Except
coming.
on TikTok.
And the TikTok operation was something of a sophistication, with unclear sources of financing, with unclear sources of algorithm that have been usually used very smartly, and also a Russian fuse to this combination. So here you call it legacy media in a sort of a pejorative way. I can say, I could call it traditional media, TV stations, cable news, newspapers. They are basically not trusted anymore by the young people, and they rush into social media. And in Romania, the TikTok operation was exceptionally sophisticated, successful, and it served the very radical candidates in a way. How to restore the trust in media? I think media itself have to think about that, because they are in a big loss of trust. And I don't see, just by good intentions and the other guys are bad and we are good. So we need to restore trust in the way in which we ourselves as citizens are consuming and digesting information, because if not, we are prisoners of these operations.
Let me add one thing which is very important, and this is, we are in the US. I come from Brussels, and I've been working in Brussels until very recently. Regulation is very important. We need regulation.
Exactly.
And this is something that we have to be more together. This is not the Brussels effect, which is what Obama used to say with a very accurate sentence, but this is a common task for the US and for Europe to work together in regulation that will limit these side effects that a non-regulatory environment will bring to all of us and even to the foundations of our democracies.
I was about to make this point. In France, we've regulated influencers, for example, and we are discussing a project to try and cut the younger people from access to the screen and social media. So I agree that even if we do not have to use regulation on every situation, on this one, maybe there is more to do, yes.
And let me just say, and then we need to go, one of the oldest policy programs of the Aspen Institute Communication Society is now called Aspen Digital. One of the many things that it looks at is declining trust in the media, the rise of social media, what can be done about it. So I think all of the Aspens share that. You all do need to move along to other things. It's the beginning of a long day. I do want to say, though, that if you're interested in our international partners and the representatives of all of the other countries, even in this audience, I urge you to come and meet the full family at noon in Dorhosier. There's going to be a unique experience involving the international partners and an art exhibit. So trust me, you might want to try to take that in, and let me thank this wonderful panel and thank all of you.
Muchas gracias, Pablo.
Good.